What did the Kohen change? He changed the type of pan. So the action shows that what he said is meaningless. But let's say he changed the owner. And he said instead of Reuven, he said Shimon. Your actions don't change the owner. You can't see that it's for the different owner.
So 1 second.
The action.
So if the Kohen comes, according to Reb Shimon, right? Who says it's the main, it's the Maisa, right? It's the action. So the Kohen comes.
So even if he had the wrong intention, still should be valid, and the owner should fulfill his obligation.
Right.
That's only if he changed. It's called a Shinei Kodesh.
Right.
You changed which type of mincha. You changed in the holiness. However, but if it was Shinei Bailim, but if you change the owner, the actions don't prove anything.
Right.
The actions don't prove anything, so then it's going to be he's going to have to bring it
right,
again.
You can't. In other words, that would be the what do you call it? The exception. In other words, so to speak. That would be the exception.
That would be an exception, and it would be not. The owner would have to bring another sacrifice, another mincha, even according to Reb Shimon. That's the way that Rabbah answers the contradiction. So can we now go back to the Mishnah and say that the reason why our Mishnah says the owner doesn't fulfill his obligation is because it's a Shinei Bailim, it's a change in the owner, right. And then our Mishnah could still be Reb Shimon. The problem is, Hamas Nisan Shinei Kodeshi. But our Mishnah didn't say that it was a change in the owner. Our Mishnah said that it was a change in the type of mincha. Diktani, as the Mishnah taught, Ketzad Lishman or Shaloi Lishman. What is the case when it was for the right intention and for the wrong intention? L'shem minchas chayte, l'shem minchas nedava. It changed the type of mincha. It said it was a minchas chayte, which was a dry mincha, and instead he brought a minchas nedava, which is a donation. So it's not going to fit, not the person.
Right. And
nevertheless, it was not valid. So according to Rabbah, Reb Shimon cannot be the author of our Mishnah. Vinami Kiddukamashani Rava. Maybe we'll say that it's the way Rava. Do you want the table?
No.
Okay.
Do you guys want me to set up in here?
Yeah, that would be nice.
Okay, fine. All right.
But should we?
Should a table? Probably need these tables. How long you doing this till 8 o'clock?
No, till 7:30.
Oh, so 7:30.
Yeah, we have another 20 minutes.
No problem. Okay, I'll do other stuff. Okay.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can try to resolve this the way Rava answers the contradiction. Kan b'kaimetz mincha l'shem mincha. Kan b'kaimetz mincha l'shem zevach. Rava said that it depends what the kmitza was done for. If it was done for another mincha, then it's still valid. However, if he would do mincha l'shum zevach, then the owner would still need to bring another one. I think Gemara has to discuss this because it doesn't fit with the logic that we were bringing. If he does kmitza on it and he has intention that it's an animal sacrifice, then for sure ma'aser mechichan ala, right? We'll see later in the Gemara how it's going to resolve it.
And it will be fine, right?
According to Reb Shimon, if it's
for
the sake of another mincha, it's no problem.
Right.
But Rava says that if it's for the sake of a sacrifice, then it's not good.
So that's where he's machalik.
So the problem over here is Hamas Nisan l'shum minchahi. It's not going to resolve our Mishnah because our Mishnah says that diktani shaloi lishman v'lishman. What was the case for the wrong intention, for the right intention? We said l'shum minchas nedav, l'shum minchas chayte. That he brought it for a donation, but he ends up having intention for a sin offering. I said before, chayte is a sin offering, not a saita offering, a sin offering. That's for the person that swore that he doesn't know testimony.
So, but when you
said was the kanais is the saita. Okay. Rather, Elo l'Rabba v'Rabba machvarta masnisin like Reb Shimon. It would work out easier. Machvarta means white. It would work out more smoothly if the Mishnah does not go according to Reb Shimon, according to Rabbah and Rabbah's explanations. Okay. Now the Gemara goes back to what it seemingly should have done beforehand and told us the contradiction and then discussed the answers. V'rami de Reb Shimon ad Reb Shimon. and Rami means to posit opposite each other. We'll point out the contradiction between Reb Shimon against Reb Shimon. The Tanya, as it was taught in a brisa, Reb Shimon says, Kodesh Kadashimi Kachata Sukkah Hashem. This is a pasuk that's talking about a carbon mincha. It says a carbon mincha is Kodesh Kadashim. It's like a chatas, it's like an asham. Yesh mem kachatayis, yesh mem kasham. Some minchas are like a chatas, and some minchas are like an asham. What's the difference between a chatas and an asham? So we have a rule at the first Mishnah in Zvachim. The Mishnah said that let's say a carbon is brought for the wrong intention. So we said it depends which carbon. Most carbonas are, if they're brought for the wrong intention, they're still valid. But the owner needs to bring another one. Exactly like our Mishnah. Like by a carbon mincha. With the exception of a carbon chatas. And it says a carbon pesach after chatzos. But with the exception of a carbon chatas that's brought for the wrong intention is not valid. That's what the first Mishnah in Tzvachim says. Now, Reb Shimon has this brisa, and he says that based on the pasuk that says that a carbon mincha is similar to a chatas, similar to an asham, he says some menachos are similar to a chatas and some are similar to an asham. Which means that some are going to be invalid,
right,
and some are going to be valid if they have the wrong intention. Minchas chayte, if it's a sin offering, a carbon mincha that's brought because a person was impure, he came into the temple, or he swore that he doesn't know testimony and he has to bring this because he doesn't have the money to bring the full sacrifice. Harei kechatas. That's like a chatas. Lefikach, and therefore, kamtza shlei l'shmaz psula. If the kmitza was done for the wrong intention, it's invalid, just like a chatas, which is offered with the wrong intention, it's invalid. Psula kechatas, just like a carbon chatas. Minchas nedava. However, if it's a donation offering, harehi ka'asham, that's like an asham. Lefikach kamtza shlei l'shma is ksheira. Therefore, if the kmitza was done for the wrong intention, it's valid. It says uka asham, and it's like a carbon asham as well. We have one other factor. Ma asham kosher ve'ina meratze. Just like an asham is kosher, but it doesn't appease. That means the owner didn't fulfill his obligation of appeasing God. Af minchas nedava ksher ve'ina meratze. Also, minchas nedava is kosher, but it doesn't appease God. That means he needs to bring another one, but the minchas is the.
What happens when it's puzzle? When the minchas is puzzle? What's the difference?
If it's totally puzzle, then it gets burnt. The rest of it doesn't get eaten.
Oh, the rest of it.
And it doesn't get burnt on the altar. It's burnt wherever puzzle things get burnt. Okay, so we have now a contradiction in Reb Shimon. Why? Because Reb Shimon before said that all sacrifices, all carbon minchas are kosher, and the person fulfills his obligation. And then we have another brisa of Reb Shimon, which seems very similar to our Mishnah, that the owner doesn't fulfill his obligation.
With the two things. With the chatas and with the...
No, by the
chatas and the asham.
Yeah, that he divides it into two categories. If it's similar to an asham because it's donation, then the mincha is valid, but the owner doesn't fulfill his obligation, he needs to bring another one. Or it could be that the mincha is totally invalid if it's a minchas chayte. It's a sin mincha.
So, according to that, so far, could the Mishnah still... The Mishnah could still go according to Reb Shimon?
We didn't answer it yet. We have to go through the answers.
Mm-hmm.
We said Rav Ashi's answer, which says depend on the wording that he used, then our Mishnah could fit with it. But according to Rabbah, which we're going to say now, Amar Rabbah, like Kasha. Rabbah says that there's no contradiction between Reb Shimon, because Kan B'Shina Kodesh, Kan B'Shina Bailam. It depends what the wrong intention was. If it's a Shina Kodesh, he changed the type of mincha, then it's still valid, and the owner fulfilled his obligation. But however, if it's the different owner, then it's invalid. The sacrifice could be valid depending on type of mincha, but the owner needs to bring another one. That's Rabbah's answer. Now, Amalei Abaya was a student of Rabbah. Abaya tells to Rabbah, Michti. Why? Let's take a michti means let's see, or now that. Why is it the wrong intention? Why is it invalid? Machshava de pasal rachmana. The thought that the Torah, or the Eibishter, Rachman is the merciful one, but it's referring to the pasuk. Hekeshehi. It's a comparison between a chatas and an asham, or a chatas asham and the carbon mincha. Kechatas a ka'asham. That teaches me that if you have the wrong thoughts, it doesn't work. Or the owner doesn't fulfill his obligation. How did you get this difference? And he's asking, Abai is asking based on a rule, is ein hekesha lemechza. If you have a comparison, then you have to do a full comparison. You can't pick and choose. Now, by an asham, where do you get this concept that you change, that if you change it, it's going to be valid? If you change it for the another sacrifice, it's going to be valid. You don't see that. You don't see that if you change an ashram for another sacrifice, it's going to be valid. So how do you get this by a carbon mincha, that if you change it for a different mincha, it's going to be valid? And you're just picking that the comparison is only for a change of owner. How do you know that? So Amalei Rabba responds, Maser mechichen. The action by the carbon mincha proves what type of mincha it is. We should do it. Maseh meichichen, the Kamar Reb Shimon svarahu. The action that proves, in quotation, that Reb Shimon mentions is logical. And the Reb Shimon darish time of the Kra. Because Reb Shimon has a very interesting opinion. He holds that you're allowed to look at the pasuk, look at a mitzvah, try to understand what the reason for it is, and then limit it to the reason. He says darshinan time of the kra, that we can look at the reason for it. Why? So what would the reason be? You say, look, this person had the wrong intention, and we don't know what's right, what's wrong, so therefore it has to be invalid. However, by the carbon mincha, you look at the type of mincha that he's bringing, and it's very clear that that's not the type that he was thinking about. So therefore the pasuk wasn't referring to that. When did the pasuk say that it's going to be invalid, or the owner doesn't fulfill his obligation? That's when I can't tell, because he said one thing and he did some, and he brought the carbon mincha, and possibly that's what it is, because I look at what it is, or not the carbon mincha. He brought the sacrifice, and I have no way of knowing which sacrifice he was bringing. The shechita by sacrifices are all the same. The receiving of the blood is all the same. The walking to all of those things are the same. All of those activities don't tell me, is it an oila, a chatas, a asham? You shechted an animal.
Right.
By the carbon mincha, it's very clear what type of pan it is. So
you're saying it's more ambiguous when it comes to karbonos,
right? And therefore, when Reb Shimon said, when there's a comparison between a chatas and an asham and the carbon mincha, that comparison would only be a comparison that would be where I cannot tell from the action that it's any different than what he said. Mm-hmm. But if I can tell from the action, for example, he had the wrong intention for the wrong pan, and he puts it into the correct pan, so then his thoughts don't matter. So, machshava deloy minkra, pasal rachmana. Thoughts that are not recognizable, what it actually is, the Torah says is invalid. Machshava de minkra, loy pasal rachmana. However, thoughts that are recognizable, the Torah never considered invalid. The Rashba has an interesting question. The Rashba, his question is like this. Abaya's claim to Rabbah was that you quoted a pasuk and you made a comparison. The pasuk made the comparison. we said that you can't make any distinctions when you do comparison. You have to take the full thing. How are you resolving it by saying something's logical? The fact is that by a chatas and by an asham, you never allowed any wrong thoughts. And all of a sudden, by the mincha, you're saying that if the thoughts are wrong, you have these exemption if the action proves that that's not the way he was thinking. But I don't have that by a chatas. So how are you saying, oh, it's logical because here it's different, but you don't have it by a chatas?
In other words, you can't use the chatas to compare it, to make the comparison, because by a mincha, you can tell.
By the mincha you can tell. By the chatas and asham you can't tell.
Right, correct.
But the problem is that would only be valid if you would have that source that you can make a distinction between can you tell or not by the chatas and the asham. But because you don't have that and you just made a hekesh, a comparison, you have to accept the full comparison. And you don't have that exception by a chatas and by an asham. So therefore you shouldn't have it by the korban mincha. That's the Rashba's question on this Gemara. He gives a beautiful answer. His answer is like this. He says, how do you know you don't have that distinction by a chatas and an asham? Maybe you do have that distinction. The only thing is, you have that distinction theoretically. That would there have been a type of case that
you can distinguish,
where you would be able to tell by a chatas and by an asham that your thoughts are not exactly what you're doing is different, then maybe over there it would have been valid. And therefore, by the mincha, it's also valid. Why do I not have that by a chatas and an asham? Just because it's not practical. But that doesn't mean there's no logic in there that there would have been that exception theoretically. You follow? The fact that a chatas and an asham never have an exemption that, oh, I see what you're doing, that's not the way you're thinking, and therefore it should be kosher.
Right.
The fact that you don't have that doesn't mean that that's not the halacha. Maybe it is the halacha. The only thing is there's no practical application of that halacha. So if that's the halacha, then I compare that halacha to the theoretical halacha, to the korban mincha, and I already have it. And by the korban mincha, it is practical. It can be applied because sometimes I can have a thought that I'm bringing the mincha on one pan, but I actually bring it on another pan, so it's clear the action shows that the thought is nothing.
Right.
That's the Rashba's teretz. That's an interesting teretz.
It's a little complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated because it's throwing in a certain factor that what it's telling me is that I can have halachas about certain things that are never applied, and now I can compare those unapplied halachas to other scenarios and say, oh, look, here it gets applied and here it can be used. Okay.
But it's using the theoretical.
It's using the theoretical
to
right.
substantiate, to validate
right.
actual
right.
practical.
Right. And how does he do that? Well,
that's the question. How can you use?
How can you
allow? How can you base a halacha based on a comparison to something that's theoretical?
Right.
Because it's not. It has no substance.
Right. So what Rab is saying is that look, Reb Shimon is understanding the reason of the pasuk, and because of that, because he's understanding the reason of he's saying that this is where it makes sense. This is where it should make sense, because if you have actions that are totally different, then why should we have the thoughts invalidated?
Right.
And now we put it out into the korban mincha, where you actually see that that's applied.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. The Gemara now is going to go through some cases of a bird sacrifice where it's very clear what type of korban it is. Alright? In other words, he's having the wrong thought. He's bringing one type of bird sacrifice, but the way he's performing it is correct, but his thoughts are for a different sacrifice. And because the way he's performing it is correct, it's clear that his thoughts are not correct. Why? How is this? Let me give you an example. An oila sa'if. Oila Saif is always brought on the upper part of the altar. Chatasaf is brought on the bottom. So he's performing an Oila Saif with
Is
thoughts.
there more chashivas, by the way, between?
I don't know.
Okay.
He's performing the Oila Saif with thoughts of a Chatasaf, but it's very clear that he's doing an Oila Saif because he's performing it on the top of the altar.
Right. But his thoughts are chatasaf.
Yeah. So according to Reb Shimon, Ma'aseh Mechichin, his actions prove that it's an Oila Saif.
Oh, because he's bringing it on top.
He's bringing it on the top. So normally this was only applicable to a carbon mincha. But when I'm doing shchita on an animal, you have no proof what type of sacrifice it is, because shchita is shchita. But here, by the birds, I can prove what type of sacrifice it is because of the location of where he's performing it. So the Gemara is just going to go through. We'll go through this quickly. It'll take us 2 minutes. The Gemara is going to go through the different activities of an Oila Sa'if where they need to be performed. Because there's really only one activity that needs to be performed on the top, and that's the squeezing of the blood or the sprinkling of the blood. But the shchita, the malika, and all of that could have really been done anywhere. Okay, it's really okay. So the Gemara starts off like this. Skip the parentheses. That's a siman. Elamiata oila saif shemalka lamaila. Let's say you do an oila saif, the malika above, on the upper part of the altar, mishum chata saif, and you have intention that it's a chata saif, that it's a sin offering, which is on the bottom. Tirtzeh. The owner should fulfill his obligation. It should appease God. Its actions prove that it's a oila saif. The chata sa'ifi, because if it would be a chata sa'if, lamata havi avidla, he should have done it on the bottom, right?
Can you explain the situation? I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. What's
He's
the situation
doing malika
here?
on an oila sa'if.
He's doing malika on an oila sa'if, which is supposed to be
on the top of the altar.
On the top part, right?
Now I have to just put in one word.
What is the maisa? The maisa is that he does it on top.
Yeah, and he has intention that it's a chata sa'if, which is done on the bottom.
Right. Okay.
So we're saying that his intention is nothing because his actions prove that it's a oila saif. He's doing it on the top.
Right, and we don't care about his intentions.
So according to Reb Shimon, it should be a kosher animal. It could be.
Right, because we said that he cares about the maisa.
Right.
So the question is, okay.
We only heard that Reb Shimon allows this by a carbon mincha. We never heard that he allows this by other sacrifices. And now here we're seeing that it should be, according to his logic, it should apply to a knife.
Right.
So the Gemara says, "Atuchata saif l'mayla milesa." Is it impossible to do malik on a chata saif above as well? Ha'amar mar, the master taught, which means it was taught somewhere else, malika b'chal makim b'mizbeach k'sheira. It's kosher if it was done anywhere. It doesn't really prove that it's an oila saif, because it would still be kosher if the shchita or the malika was done above. Now the Gemara asks, oila saif shemitza dama l'mayla l'shem chata saif tirtzeh. Oila saif that the blood was squeezed out for the sake of a chata saif, but it was squeezed on the top of the altar. Its action should prove that it's a oila saif. The chata saifi, because if it would be a chata saif, lamata avidlei hazah. A chatas has two things. Chatas, the blood is sprinkled. That means it's like shaken, and it's also squeezed. If it was a chatas, you would have done hazah, and you would have done it below. The Gemara says,
so it shows that he's trying to do.
Amri dilma mitzi de basar hazahu, the amar mitzi dama b'chol makom b'mizbeach k'sheira. The mitzi itself, the squeezing of the blood, doesn't prove anything, because could be it's the second activity, and the master said that mitzi that's done anywhere on the altar is kosher. So finally we get to the main point. We say chata sa'if shehiz dama lamata. Let's say it's a chata sa'if, that you sprinkled the blood on the bottom, but you had intention l'shem oila sa'if. You had intention that it should have been on the top. Tirtzeh, the owner should fulfill his obligation. Its actions prove that it's a chatas. The oila saifi lamayla hava avidla, because if it was oila saifi, you had to do it above. Umitza hava avidla, and you would have had to squeeze it, not sprinkle it. The Gemara says hachanami. You're correct. What he meant to say, what Reb Shimon said, is that the menachos are not similar to zvachim. The menachos is not similar to sacrifices. And sacrifices specifically are animal sacrifices, not bird sacrifices. And that's why Reb Shimon would have this exception by this one case of a chatas ha'oif, that he had intention for the wrong thing, that it would still actually be valid because it's proven that it's a chatas ha'oif.
Well, the fact of the matter is that, in other words, if you bring with the chatas, right? Wait, if he brings, you said if he brings, what is supposed to go on the bottom again? I keep getting
the chatas ha'oif goes on the bottom.
Chatas, right?
The
so if he does,
if
he brings a chatas ha'oif, right, and he brings it that he's supposed to, but he hasn't, and he's supposed to bring a chatas, but he has intention that it's supposed to be an oila, he's fine,
right? Because his actions prove what it is.
Right. That's basically what we've been saying the whole time.
What was this?
Question mark. And Amar Mar. Malika question mark. The master said that the malika that's done anywhere on the altar is still kosher. So even if the chatas is done above, it's still kosher. It doesn't prove that it's an oila.
What's the...
Amar Mar, the master said in Zvachim, Malika b'chomakim mizbeach k'sheira. Malika anywhere on the altar is kosher. So therefore you don't have masem mechichan allowed that it's an oila. Because it really is a chatas.
I wish I could sleep up to 10.
Yes.